dewa kari ale
The Ubud Writers and Readers Festival returns with the theme Mulat Sarira, self-reflection, which is a Balinese Hindu philosophy, a spiritual principle of examining our actions, thoughts and values to ultimately build the deepest sense of self-understanding, wisdom and interconnectedness in the pursuit of Dharma, the truth. These are not normal times, and many of us are still trying to value and evaluate the turbulence of this journey to navigate a path to calmness, comfort and clarity. The festival will delve into self-reflection and beyond, into cultural introspection, human rights, animal rights, the environment, and to examine who we are, what unites and divides us, how we coexist on this planet, how we care for our planet. We will delve into tangible and imaginary landscapes across fields of dreams, of oceans, mountains, into deserted islands, ancient temples, jungles, forests, villages, cities, Bali, our beloved home, and Ubud, a place whose name simply means Obat, medicine. To which parts of normal do we wish to return, and what lessons learned will we take into the future? Join us in a festival that promises to be extraordinary, because Bali is extraordinary. Join us in a festival that promises to be extraordinary, because Bali is extraordinary.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are well. Welcome to the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival 2021. Thank you for joining us for our next session. Ethical Tourism Post-Pandemic with our speakers, Ibu Nilo Jelantik, and will be moderated by Ibu Janet Denif. Enjoy the session.
Anyway, let's silakan duduk. I don't have my pre and après script, so not to worry. I make my own rules. Well, thank you so much for joining us in today's session. I am really excited and honoured to be presenting you Nilo Jelantik. And some of you will know who she is, and the rest will know who she is in a minute. So Nilo is from Singaraja, up that way, or Kintamani actually, isn't it?
I was born in Batur.
Batur.
And my father is from Singaraja.
Yep, there we go. So she's up there, from up there. And I guess mostly known in the business crowd for her shoes. Nilo Jelantik shoes, yes. So she's a self-made businesswoman. She's an entrepreneur, created her empire of shoes. There's a bit of a story with that. And more recently has become probably Bali's most outspoken person, defending Bali, her beloved home, which is our beloved home now too. And she's the voice behind every issue that concerns us. And only Nilo is brave enough to say what she feels. So she has a huge following among the Baranese, of course. She's, of course, very Baranese, and everybody really respects what she represents. And now in politics. So, so we're kind of hoping she'll run for president. So, yeah. So welcome, Nilo Jelantik. And now living in kind of Grobogan, yeah, that outer area.
Canggu, yeah.
Canggu, yeah, the country of Canggu, or some people call it the Republic of Canggu. So, you know, Nilo has her own story, but I thought maybe, what do you think's best? We go straight into who you are right now, or do you want to have a bit of history, Nilo's history? Maybe she has a fascinating story, as you can imagine. So let's just introduce your story. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start when you were a young girl? You're still young. Or do you want to start with the creation of your business?
You are the boss.
But that's why I love her, you know. Well, let's just start with your story. You grew up in Batur, and
First of all, I would like to say good afternoon, ma'am, sir. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Nilo Putu Ari Pertami Jelantik, but people usually call me Nilu or Mbok Nilu. I was born in Batur Selatan, in a small village up from about maybe 20 minutes from Ubud, or half an hour from Ubud. And so I was born in Kintamani, but I was raised, and I spent most of my childhood in Denpasar. But then when I was 12 until 19, as my father and my mother, they were separated since I was 10 months old. So by Indonesian law, you can only follow your mom from the day you were born until when you are 11. When you are 12, by law, you cannot really say no, you have to follow your father. So that was part of my journey. And where I was with my mom as a single parent, I was surrounded by women. 95% of my family are women. And so we have the habit to speak for ourselves. We have the habit to, you know, to say no, and our uncles, our cousin, they totally respect that. And but at the same time, we also put the man that we have in our family with full of respect. So when I live with my father, was totally the opposite. We are surrounded by men's world. So I think this kind of situation, the two worlds that I live in, and then continue with the experiences that I have while I was studying and working at the same time in Jakarta, it really give a very very strong influence in my life that really shaped my characters. And because, as you know, Buleleng is totally apart from the rest of Bali. When we are in Ubud, when you are in Gianyar, or when we are in Denpasar, you are used to it with, to become like soft personality, you know, you say hello with politeness. But in Buleleng, we have the same character with those who are from Medan, for example. Or Batak, or Surabaya, which is known as a very tough personality. And then, so that was part of my life when I was a child, that I was raised with my mom. I was raised by my mom, and I spent most of my my childhood in the market. My mother's family, we are traders. So we've been traders for a generation. So my mom used to walk from Kintamani to Bangli every 2 or 3 days by walk, because in 1960s, as we know, we had the eruption of Gunung Agung. So there was no street, no cars, no transportation. And then in the 70s, we became the first family from Batur that actually migrate to Denpasar. You know, you don't migrate from, let's say, from Europe to Australia, for example, but as a Balinese, to go away from Buleleng to, let's say, Karangasem is already a big step for us as a Balinese. So this is what we did in the 70s, and we became the first family in the market in Pasar Kumbasari, that opening up the space for the rest of our family from Kintamani. And my father, from my father's side, he came from the banker family. So you understand why they don't get along. My mom doesn't go to school. She went to school until she was like 12 years old. My dad has the financial background of education. My mom, she was like me, you know. Most of the time she wear no sandals. And that is maybe God punished me and made me later a shoemaker because I grew up with almost, no shoes. Yeah, no shoes. And that was one of the reasons why 19 years ago I decided to take on this business, because when you had no shoes, you have to wear the shoes that are 2 or 3 sizes bigger. And when you go to school, and then you have this kind of love and relationship with shoes. And then as soon as you are able to make your money, earn your money, the first thing that you buy is shoes. So I'm not a typical Balinese, you know, like usually, you know, we as a Balinese, we need to look good, right, for the temple, wearing some kind of like jewelry, golds, and things like that. But not for me as a person. And as time goes by, today we run one of the, a very small company, a very small shoemaking company. But at the same time, me personally, we can be very proud and say that this little tiny company is able to stand up for the last 19 years and to be able to give example to hundreds of thousands of students around the country, that you can actually do the things from zero, that you actually can start from the bottom of your life. You doesn't have to become the son of someone or the daughter of someone, you know. And the story that we have has been used as an example by countless universities in Indonesia, and also at the same time, I told them not to give up their dream, you know, that they can become anybody or anybody they want, whatever they want, as long as they hold on to the principle in life, principle, honesty, and integrity. So yeah, Nilu is not only a pair of shoes. If you click on Nilu Jelantik on Google, you will find like some beautiful shoes worn by Julia Roberts, Giselle Bundchen, the royal family, you know, and some of the biggest actresses and actors in Hollywood. And but you see, the woman behind the brand is here.
When I posted your photo that we were doing a session, I got a DM. Someone said, "Oh my God, I still have a pair of Nilu shoes." Like she said, they're 7 years old and they're still amazing. So, yeah, well done.
So thank you very much for listening to my long, how do you call it? I mean, it is a very simple story, a story of a girl from a village, you know,
But it's not that
but
simple.
I have to explain that in such a way that there's nothing to be missed, you know.
But so you studied in Jakarta, yeah?
Since I was 19.
Yeah. So you went to the next big smoke from the Denpasar big smoke. Then you went to Jakarta. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Jakarta was not the plan actually, because my father, he has already another plan for me. He wants me to become a banker as his big family. But the problem is I can be very good in selling. I can call myself a very good salesperson, and because I studied it since I was 6 years old. I already have my own little stall in the market, and but then when it comes to the real subject, I am always like, you know, how do you call it? Like people, they don't really consider me at school. I was not active in any organization, but I was the only position that I hold at school is I was the chief in the class, but then, you know, academically, like anything that make you proud to become a student, I didn't really have that, because when my friends are busy playing, I'm busy selling, and when I graduate, my father has already a plan for me, but then my mom also had another plan for me. My mom and my youngest auntie told me later, only when I was already in Jakarta, they told me the plan, but I didn't know. So when I packed my backpack, driven by my cousin to the bus terminal, wearing my flip-flop, with only 5,000 rupiah in my pocket, give my big hug to my grandma, I didn't know that it was the last time for me to see Bali for the next few years. And I didn't know. I just wanted to see the golden, the golden tower in Jakarta, in Monas. That was my only dream at that time. I wanted to see Monas. But for almost 8 years I'm in Jakarta. I spent my life in Jakarta. I didn't get a chance to see that tower. You know? Maybe once in the last 25 years. And so both of my parents, they already have different plan, and finally I choose the latter, which is my mom's plan, because she told me once, in bahasa we say it like this, jangan seperti katak dalam tempurung. Don't live your life like a frog inside the coconut bowl. There are so much things you can see out there. I mean, for a woman who was born in Kintamani, who didn't have any formal education, and he said that to me, and So so I went to Jakarta in 1994. I started my first job in 1995 as a receptionist and also as a front office staff. But actually, I'm the one who hold the key of the office. So, as you understand, I become the first person who will open the office door and the last person who leave the office. So this kind of how do you call it? I really learned a lot from my bosses. I started my professional career when I was 19, and 7 years later, I became the director of one of the biggest fashion company, the American fashion company. So
We're fast forwarding it, yeah.
this career is not usual for Indonesian. Usually, you have certain, you can stay, you can take your level staff maybe for 5 years, and another 5 years you become supervisor, and another 5 years you become manager with 8 to 10% salary increase every year. But for me, because I took so much of the tasks that given to me without, I never say no actually. So in 1 year, I knew everything. I can do any, any task that are given to me. And then my career went so fast that when my friends are all graduated, I was already becoming, manager in one of the biggest IT company in the world. So
that's back in Bali, is that?
That was in Jakarta.
In Jakarta too.
In Jakarta.
Okay, yeah.
And I took the habit of waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day. Took the bus or the train, and then went back home from the office around 6:30 or 7 p.m. and then go to school at night every day. And then during the weekend, on the weekend, I had to go to the wholesale market to bought some clothes to resell again, because when you are 19, you didn't have what you call the bargain power. You cannot choose the job that you love. So when I say to my student, there was a saying, choose the job that you love, then you never work for a day in your life, right? But 99% will tell me, I don't love my job, Mbok Nilu. I don't like my job. Who wants to become the best sweeper in the world? Who wants to become the best gardener in the world? Everybody, most of the parents wants the best for their kids, right? But you cannot kill their dream. I just told them, look at me. My first job, I graduated from one of the best school in Bali, and I was sweeping. I was sweeping the floor. I was cleaning up the floor. I was making sure that everybody in my office has the drink that exactly according to their taste. When you have to take care your principal from Ireland, from London, from Sydney, from France, from Germany, they all have different tastes. The tea that they drink, the coffee that they drink, and when you are 19, you're coming from nowhere in Bali, you actually never see any screen in your life. A phone with like 50 extension, You know what I mean? But you have to learn fast. So Jakarta taught me a lot, and I never regretted all the colorful journey that I have in Jakarta, that actually becoming the foundation of my my life. And so yeah, that's the story of part of a Jakarta story. Yeah.
So let's fast forward it, and you're back in Bali, and you've started Nilu Jelantik, yeah, the shoes. Do you want to tell us that whole story?
Yeah. I went back to Bali in 2002.
Yep.
To take up another responsibility.
Oh yeah.
I accept the challenge from Mr. Paul Rob, as the person in charge for the marketing division. And as we understand, 2002 was not an easy year for us in Bali. So when you tell everybody that my business is finished, or I have to close down my restaurants or my hotels, everybody will understand. we had, I mean, we experienced, you know, one of the biggest, hardest moment in our life, the Bali bombing. But Paul's company at the time, we reached the record that we increased our sales by 330%.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
So
Do you
Paul
wanna-
was
do you want a job?
Paul was very happy with me. And how do you call it? And then I had to go to New York. I have to go to the US because for me there's no way that the tourists will come. Kuta was dead, Legian was dead, and then we had about 80 people under our roof. We just opened all the shop in Kuta Square, in Bali Galleria, in Kuta Galleria, and I didn't have any other choice but to, in Bahasa we call it jemput bola, so to pick up your own ball. So I said, okay, I'm going. With all the drama that we have to go through, imagine, days after the bombing, you going to this big country that consider you like, you know, what is your religion? So if at that time you're saying one religion, you are rejected. You have to fill this amount of paper. But because our survival instinct is much bigger than our fear, so in the embassy I explained everything. I didn't have to explain everything, but I just spending hours explaining to them. I'm from Bali, this is what, I'm working for the American company, and this is what we're gonna do in the US, and finally we went to New York with 500 garments on our hand,
Yeah.
all hand carry, and then we made around $400,000 in 2 days.
Wow.
And then we went back, and then I got sick, and then I just realized that that, you know, I can only achieve so much. I've been doing all I can for all the companies that I've been working for, and not a single day I ever betrayed them. Not even had a single thought about it. So I'm very loyal to every employer who has given me a roof, you know, to create and to work and also to learn. And but then I got sick. I got quite sick, and I was not able to walk or to move for a few months. So I decided maybe this is the time for me to start another thing, and that was in 2003. So Nilu was born, and fast forward 2 years later, we found ourselves in 20 countries. We are mostly in Western Europe, in the US, in Japan, also in Saudi Arabia, and also in South Africa.
Shoes. We do shoes.
And but nobody knows who is Nilu. I refused any kind of interview. I just told everybody at the time, let the shoes speak for themselves. So the shoes can be found in Paris, for example, or can be found in New York, but nobody knows who Nilu is. They only know our distributor. But later, that kind of decision had become one of the biggest mistake of my life. That we are so busy in our little workshop that we didn't realize we don't actually own the brand. So we are already in 20 countries. We didn't realize that Nilu is not belong to us. And so we had to go through at one period that both of our distributor came to us to Bali and offering us a very, if you are thinking about business, then that kind of offer is a very interesting business. Who doesn't want to expand? Who doesn't want to create, instead of 4,000 shoes every season, you can create 400,000 shoes? Who doesn't want to have a bit of like, how do you call it, a bit of share in an international company? But me as a person, when I started the business, it was with a very simple reason. I got sick. I was not able to do the best that I can for the company that I work for. Even though I was the, how do you call it? In Indonesia, we call it ujung tombak. So you have, how do you call it?
Ujung.
The tombak?
Spearhead.
Spearhead.
Spearhead. Yeah. I think ujung. Yeah.
So I always become the frontliner of the company. So there was no reason for me to resign because the company already, how do you call it, work by itself. All the shop has been open, the sales, increase gradually. But for me, this is the principle that I had since I was very young. When you have no use anymore in the company that you are working for, you become a liability. I mean, I can just go to sleep and let our 40 sales staff working because all the system has been formed. But we go back again to one person character, right? So I decided, okay, Paul, I quit. Give me 1 month. I'm going to find someone to replace me, and then I spent like 1 month, 1 full month as a jobless person. That was the longest months in my life. And then, yeah, fast forward, Nilu was born, and then in 2007 we lost our brand. Because when our distributor came from Europe and also from Melbourne, they present us with this big offering, but with one condition. I had to stop the production in Bali. We have to move to Guangzhou. And when you started something with the intention to create something that you didn't know that the brand will become a big brand, a huge brand, or maybe you will be bankrupt after 6 months. I didn't know. But at the time, we came out with a very simple dream. Nilu is a handmade creation that I created in Indonesia, in Bali, with love, with the best quality material that we can find, and it has to be made by Indonesian. We would like to show to the world that Indonesia is not only rich we are not only, how do you call it, people know us as a, as a country with beautiful scenery and also with culture and also with our tradition, but I would like to introduce the people behind the country. And that was 19 years ago, long before all the technology, Facebook, Instagram, and all of that. And then I was faced with the possibility to expand, to have 4,000 staff instead of 40. And then they give me 24 hours to think about it. I told them I didn't have 24 hours. I can tell you now. And they were like already, okay. So I said, no. They got really upset. They actually they didn't call me names, but they told me something like, everybody needs money. Everybody wants money. You are the only person I haven't known that doesn't need money. And I told them, everybody needs money. I run the company with a loan, with the first land or the first houses that I ever built with my sweat and my tears, I put it in the bank with 24% of interest. Everybody needs money. But if I have to sell my integrity to get that money, then this is the door. Thank you very much. I don't expect to see you anymore.
That's a hard one to, yeah.
Well, at the time I was proud.
Yeah.
And the next day, we realized everything was gone. No more brand. Because, as a, how do you call it? When you export something, when you cannot justify that the brand is yours, you will have big possibility, you will be sued by the, how do you call it, the head office in France or in Australia, and there will be a big risk that they will cut your shoes. I cannot take that risk, and I didn't even try to fight for it. I didn't try to. I tried once, but they said no. So okay. I didn't try to say, let's say, to fight for the rights or for the intellectual property right of our brand. I just decided to bury it deep in in the box, and I said to the boys, because that night we were already quite famous at the time, but that night we lost all of we lost all of our how do you call it, self-confidence. We become so helpless at the time. We were crying. If you seen our boys, they were like quite strong and full of tattoo and 15 years ago we were quite young, and suddenly we were nobody, and we have the right to quit at the time. But if I can fight for Paul back in 2002, and then today we have this little house named Nilu, and I already take one of the biggest decisions of my life. I decided to leave all of those possibilities to become, global brand, and then, big fashion designer or whatever you call it. And I decided to choose all these men, because they're all men, that has been with me since the day one. So give up was not an option. So I told them, I love you, you love me, but love is not going to cure anything. Love is not going to feed any of your wife or children. So we have to move on. So the next day, in 24 hours, we back on our feet. Yeah. And it was not easy. It was in 2007, and 1 year later, Nilu Jelantik was born.
So you rebranded.
Yeah, in 2008, yeah.
So it was a case of losing that side, but rising and rebranding to a whole new shoe line, which exists down that way. So so you've got a sense of Nilu's background, and I think by now you have a sense of her character. So from your business and your shoe empire and all the rest, and everybody here is now wanting a pair of your shoes. So when did you start becoming outspoken about Bali and what's happening?
I've been always, how do you call it? When I was in Jakarta, when I had my first job as the receptionist and also the sweeper, the office girl, and the office boy, and I have 4 million rupiah at a time every day in my drawer. I make 250,000 rupiah a month. That was like almost my 2-year salary. I never steal a cent of them, never thought, never do it. But how can you live with 250,000 rupiah in the capital? So I told my bosses, if you cannot increase my salary, because actually I'm doing the job of 10 people. I mean, everybody calling me, like, Ami, like I become the handyman of everyone, but they refused to increase my salary at the time. So I told them I have 2 choices. I become a quarter person, or I have to let you know that I have to do something else in my life, which is selling. So you cannot increase my salary, so I'm going to do something else, but not during my office hour, but during my break, lunch break, because I never take lunch break. So that 1 hour I use it to taking care of my side business. And then he said yes, and that's how I survive in Jakarta.
So you developed a business in your 1 hour lunch break.
Yeah. And I ran this tiny rooms in the south of Jakarta, a small city called Depok. Happy Salma was actually my roommate.
Oh, what?
The big sister of Happy Salma.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, she was my roommate,
Yeah.
and that little room, the size was about 9 square meter or 10 square meter. I always took the corner rooms until today. When you see our shop or our retail, all of them are always in the corners room, in the corners part, because my mom loves gardening. So as small as the space as we have, she always need a space to put her plants, and yeah, that room was fulfilled with a tiny bed, gas stove, lots of bed sheet, all the the things that I sell, and so. As you see, when I was 20, I already knew, don't steal, never think about it. I'm today 46 years old. I have never seen or I have never known what is inside my mom's bag until today. I will never dare taking my mother's bag and,
Can you speak to
without
my
asking
son,
her.
please?
Pardon?
Can you speak to my son, please?
But my mom, she knows everything. She knows everything what is inside my bag. So one day, 1 minute I put my bag. I promise you, in 5 minutes it's all neat. And she said, "There's one seat of 100,000, one of 50,000, one of 20,000, and one of 5,000." I was like, and I'm 46 years old. I'm always her baby, So that character has been built since, I don't know, maybe not since I was born, apparently, but since I was very young. And then when I started the business, or when I working for the companies in Jakarta, I always being outspoken, Ibu. Let's say we have a company with 40 of expat. Everyone needs kitas. The other 39, you can have the agent to do it for you. But my bosses, my direct boss, I'll do it myself. So at the time, the system, you give a bit of here under the envelope and here and here. And I was 21 years old. I just give my smile. It took them like 1 month to finish all the paperwork. It took me only 1 week. I go all the way from that morning. I make sure that I see the boss on the same day. And there was no social media at that time. And then that habit, follows my career life. I'm not ashamed when I tell everybody that I got fired once. Usually to get fired is like one of the, it's a very, shameful moment, right? You said you resign. You leave the company because you want to achieve something new. But I said, I got fired. I got fired, and I give that letter to the owner of the company. And within seconds, he teared up the paper, and he told me, "Let's go back to work. What are you doing here?" Why did I got fired? Because I refused to create a company inside of a company. I refused the offer from my because we have the CEO and we have the director. So I refused his offer to create a company inside of company and offering me a position as his partner. I told him I was 24 years old at the time. He was 50. He was 55. I told him, I look up to you as my father. You are the one who interviewed me. I take the job. I do all my best to bring all of these clients, and now you are offering me this kind of thing. You are stealing from the company. I said no. The next day I got fired. Okay. I give the paper, and I told my bosses, I got fired. Give me 1 month, because the law says you have 1 month. They didn't even ask me, because they know where their money is coming from. I'm the only sales that they have. The only, you know what I mean? So this kind of habit following me day by day, because your character it cannot be built by, overnight. You cannot just say, I'm fighting for the people while you're stealing from them 20 years ago. You have the full record of your life that cannot be erased. So what happened in Bali, or what happened in the time or during my period building our own company, that I have to face the same situation that I had in Jakarta, that I can go through, that I can still can say that I'm proud to become, to be who I am, despite all the risk. I took all the risk. I never compromise. I don't compromise. And then when I was in Bali, I thought I'm going to be fine. It's my hometown. I was born here. They're all Balinese. The governor is Balinese. The Bupati is Balinese. I'm going to be fine. But I promise you, the first year I'm in Bali, every week I flew back to Jakarta. Every week. Every Friday I took my flight to Jakarta, and I told my colleague in Jakarta, God, you know what I mean? You came from the capital, like with all the, what they call it, like some corrupt system, and you went back to your hometown, and then you don't feel welcome, because you think you are alone. You are different. You are so different that you can be the youngest. You're making the most, but you became the most hated person. And then it continued when we built in Lujalantik, when we created the company. We were facing with so many obstacles. From the day you decided to be to license your company, from the day you decided to become like a good citizen, to report your revenue and things like that. It was always something, and then at the time I thought I'm alone. I had nobody to hold on to, And then 2009 I found a person who later became my online mentor, who gave me, he actually have given me so much energy, that what I've been fighting for, what I've been voicing for.
Who was that?
Pardon?
Was that
Ahok?
Ahok, yeah.
Yeah. And
do you know who Ahok is? I don't think our audience. Tell us about Ahok.
Ahok is a quite a controversial profile in this country. He's Chinese. He's non-Muslim. He was born and raised from a small island in part of Sumatra that called Bangka Belitung.
I didn't know that.
Bangka Belitung.
Okay. Yeah.
And we had a quite similar background. He was a businessman, but he was in the mining industry, and
you know that Belitung is BHP Belitung. So Belitung
is near Batam. Is near.
Belitung was taken from Belitung, which is Bangka. Yeah.
Bangka Belitung,
Yeah,
and.
yeah.
But when I saw him for the first time, I saw someone on computer insulting everybody, shouting at everybody in the parliament room. Like he was full of fire. He was like, like, I'm going to fire you, I'm going to bring you to jail, and this and this and that. I was like, wow, this guy, We were like, okay. It has given me so much energy, because I don't bribe. I never bribe in my life. I don't cheat. And what we think that we do something good or something correct, it might not be correct in the eyes of other people, right? Especially to those in power. So we didn't have any plan to go into politics. The same with Ahok. We called him Ahok. He also didn't have any plans to go into politics. But he was so frustrated with the system. He got such a, such a big grudge, like a revenge, like, God, I'm gonna break you down, But the only way is to become one of you. So then yeah.
So then he became.
And then he became Bupati. And then he became legislator in his hometown. And then later he ran for Bupati and he won. And then later he ran for governor. By vote, he won.
In Jakarta by now, yeah.
No, in Bangka Belitung.
Ah, okay.
But
yeah.
he refused to bribe. He knew it, he won, but he refused to bribe. So he has to let go that governor, how do you call it, position.
Yeah.
And then he decided to go to Jakarta to run for a parliament again. And then he won. 2 years later, he became 1 or 2 years later, he ran with Jokowi for Jakarta election, and they won. And 2 years later, Jokowi became a president. So automatically, he became the governor. And then our path met again. That was in 2000 from 2014, I am already very active in politics, but independently. I supported Jokowi at the time. We became the independent supporter, volunteer. But because we have the voices, and we have our own, how do you call it? We never call our followers, because for me they are also human. I'm just a shoemaker. These people who are in our social media, they came from so many backgrounds. Ministers, you call it, public figure, and housewife. So I call them my love, kesayangan. Yeah. And so our path crossed again in 2015 when Ahok ran for ran for a governor, but independently without using the political party. Which is possible because he's been doing so many changes in Jakarta. Jakarta is the capital of Indonesia. There was a saying, if you can beat Jakarta, you basically can live in any other part of Indonesia. And Jokowi and Ahok, they were like, how do you call it? Perfect combination. Jokowi, he doesn't speak much, he work a lot. Ahok, he speaks so much. He loves talking, but he also works a lot. He went to the office at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he went back home at midnight every day. And then 2 years later, when he ran for governor, as his militant supporter, we support him. But then we realized that as clean as you can be, as good as you can be, as dedicated as you can be, everything can be finished in a matter of days. So
I think let's move forward again. Ahok's another story, so you have to research that for those who don't know what happened. But he's now director of Pertamina.
He's become the how do you call it?
After being thrown into jail for his
the first commissaris utama, we call it in Pertamina, the biggest state-owned oil company.
Oh. So let's move forward because we're talking about Bali during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So I don't have my watch with me. So now you're very active on social media. So how many followers do you have?
On Instagram?
Yeah, on Instagram. Sorry,
on Instagram about 344,000.
Yeah. So she's got a lot of followers, and you've been very concerned more recently about what's been happening in Bali, about the sort of visitors we've been having, and there's comments on your Instagram account every day about things you're not happy about. I think you're the only person that challenges Costa. So tell us a little bit about that, the governor of Bali. So I'm sure he's scared of you, actually. Yeah.
I've been always, how do you call it? Even before social media was born, I always speak my words, speak my voice, and I make sure it is heard. And I didn't really actually care who I was fighting with, and I will never fight with the people. I will never go against them. I can sit down with them and explain the reason why I have to do the things that I have to do. But when I have to be faced with power, when I have to be faced with people who is possible abusing their power, that I become someone else. I become like the hardest and the how do you call it? And then when people see me, like, she's such a tiny woman, you know. How can she how do you call it? She feel a big complaint, and the next few weeks the minister has he's fired, you know, something like that, you know. But okay, it's not, you know, it was not like, it was not me who make him get fired, because he's not doing his job. So this is the kind of example. But when we go back to Bali, Bali, as we know, is the island of the mother of our founder of this nation, the proclamator, Sukarno. His mom is from Buleleng, so he got this half of Balinese blood with him, and I'm a Sukarnoist. And what I mean is, like, you have the choice to be with the people or to go against them, right? And what people need basically is the basic need, to be able to work in peace, to be able to raise their family in peace, to be able to send their children to have the best education they can, and to be able to have the stability in the place where they were born, which is Bali. And since, I mean, before the pandemic, I was already very vocal, but then the pandemic arrived. I keep on reminding everyone that I know, those are in power, I've been reminding them for the last 12 years. I said, be careful, be careful, be careful. We need to put ourselves, and we need to position ourselves. Where are we going to be in 20 years? Where are we going to be in 30 years? What kind of clientele that we would like to serve? Because Bali can only absorb so much. I was called anti-backpacker at the time. But I told them, saya tidak anti-backpacker. I give fully respect to those people who bring their backpack, climb the mountain, go into the ocean, but leave the place better than when they came. So backpacker staying in the $10 room, or someone who stays in resort in Ubud and has to pay $1,000 a night, for me they are all as valuable for me, you know, and I give them my full respect. But we can only take that much. And at the time, we didn't have yet the 155,000 rooms. When you have 155,000 rooms, when you calculate it, you need to have about 60 million tourists every year. When you make the rough calculation, 60 million tourists. Can imagine the size of the Ubud Road? Can imagine the size of Seminyak and Legian Road? But you can only talk about it, you can only feel the complaint, but because you are not in the system, there's nothing much you can do. And when we have to face the pandemic, we were faced with some regulation, some rules that are not well prepared. Rules that are being released 2 days before tens of thousands of tourists are ready to visit Bali. Tens of thousands of domestic tourists who are ready to hire the private plane or Garuda, with the whole family, who has been waiting for 6 months, wanting to visit the island. But then, one rules arrived. The rules that, not only create tension between the local tourists and me, because I've been known as the one who always you know, always in my swimming costume, you know, from one beaches to another beaches, and suddenly I'm on the beach with my kebaya, opening my computer and introducing Work from Bali, even before the minister introducing Work from Bali. I do anything that I can to make people feel home in Bali. So I don't ask them, I don't beg them, come to Bali, we need you. No, I just tell them simply, welcome home. So you can imagine how upset you are when you have to face this kind of regulation that are that totally against, you know, against your own, you know. I mean, I never put the difference between the international tourism or local tourism. But we cannot despise them, we cannot neglect them, we cannot put them in the position that you are the second citizen. You are Indonesian, you have no money, you know. The same services that sometimes we also experience when we go to the beach club, for example, in Seminyak area. I understand that, but we trying to, how do you call it, trying to make peace. You know, saying sorry to...
We're going to open up for questions in a minute, okay? We're going to run a little bit over time, but that's no problem, actually.
So all the complaints that I have been, how do you call it, expressing to the people, to the, how do you call it, to the governor, for example, everything is based on fact. This is the fact, this is the loss, and this is the solution. It's always coming with the solution. But again, not everybody is as open-minded, you know. Not everybody will be open to critics. Not everybody will understand that you're actually doing something to, how do you call it, to
Rio's got a question over there. Tutu di belakang. Tutu di belakang. Tutu. Yeah. Pak Rio. So we're just opening up for questions. I'm sure you've probably got lots of questions to ask.
Briefly, your experience in reinventing yourself, your experience in facing, you know, very difficult, you know, decisions that you had to make, your emphasis on doing things properly. How do we bring that? This post-pandemic era will be just like madness. You know, it's historically, every time there's a crisis in the world, after the crisis, there's this kind of mad moment where everybody just goes crazy. And that will happen here. What do you think, you know, I don't have any faith in the government getting this together, but do you think you have the capacity or the circle of people, perhaps in the private sector or whatever, to actually bring weight to this idea of redefining tourism in Bali?
For your information, for every complaint that we feel, it turns into revision. So when we complain on one rule, Bapak, the next day, that rules has changed. You know, and then you have another 1 month to breathe again. Okay, with the hope and pray, we hope that he won't make any more mistake, or we hope that he won't make any more like a blunder, how do you call it, statement on media, and which is he just did yesterday. He said that tourism doesn't give any impact to the people. Balinese tourism actually doesn't give any impact but tourism doesn't give any impact to the only to the investor. So try to explain that to someone who has been in the hospitality industry for 30 years, 40 years. Try to explain that to the founder of the hotel, the tourism hotel school. Try to explain that to the minister. Try to explain that to the president, who actually put us all together 6 years earlier, expressing his dream that he would love Indonesia to have tourism as the number one, to have tourism as the number one revenue instead of the palm industry and also manufacturing. has been told in 2016. Try to tell him that. Try to explain that Bali is giving 70% of his income to the state. It's not important. Tourism is not important. But so we are in the middle of chaotic moment. And me as a person, I have a very, very close relationship with the small and medium enterprises. So as you know, Indonesian political situation, they all decided by political party. So me as a person, I can go to every door, every area without, you know, looking at their color, because for me, it's like this. We cannot kill tourism. We can only, like Bapak said, reshaping it, redefining it. Like what we say, maybe we can say rebranding it. We cannot say, for example, no, I don't accept you from this country because you are only a trust. You cannot say that. The moment we call this country is a trust, only bringing trust tourists, the next month we have to back to that country, please bring us back your people. No, we cannot say this. So us, how do you call it? For me, tourism will be always there. Will be always there. There will be always people who come and fall in love with Bali, who always have a reason to come back to Bali, and they are home. But at the same time, we are creating new opportunities. When you have a restaurant, when you have a coffee shop, when you have a small warung, or when you have a small businesses in Bali, and you rely on tourism, you will need to get prepared. You don't put your egg in one basket anymore.
We have another question.
And this is what we've been doing, and it worked. And so we hope the answer is yes, ma'am.
Nilu, you're obviously already using your influence to create change in, you know, tourism and politics in Bali. Do you intend to further that influence by going into politics, or can you create more change staying out and agitating?
Well, my mentor, actually he told me this in prison, Ibu, in jail, because he went to jail. And he told me that you keep on fighting, and I did the same thing. You keep on fighting and fighting until you go against the wall and you have nowhere to go. So you become so frustrated. And I've been there. So the only way you can beat them up, you can give so much more benefit and happiness to the people that you are fighting for, you need to be inside. So we did that. We did that 2 years ago. We ran for parliament. We ran for parliament and to represent Bali in Jakarta. The next day we got so many phone calls that we actually won. That we actually get all the vote, like I didn't know how much, but we got so many phone calls. But at the same time, I was the official team of Jokowi. He ran for the second terms as a president. So you have these two choices. You fight for your right. It means you have to let go this bigger duty. So I choose the latter. I choose to keep my concentration on Jokowi. Jokowi won 93% at the time. 93% of Balinese people vote. He might not be the best, but he's the best that we can have at the time, you know. So we fight for him. We introducing all of the programs that he's been running since he became a mayor in Solo, and he won that 93% vote in Bali. But on the other side, we have to be faced with the reality. It doesn't matter how many phone calls that you get, all the congratulations, all that. Wow, the first congresswoman ever, you know, because we become the first woman at the first congresswoman from that political party. But at the end of the day, the numbers speak for itself. And you cannot,
Yeah.
how do you call it? Well, you couldn't fight for it, because this is why I really give not so much pressure, but I always tell the young generation, do not be afraid to go into politics. You always have someone who will be ahead of you, cutting all the wild grass, all the sharpness, and that this is what I'm doing. So maybe 2 years ago, people call us loser, people calling us by names and insulting my family, blah, 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 and all of this. But from the eyes of the people, from the eyes of the people in those villages, that they know my vote is for Sister Nilu. They will give me big hug, and for them, it doesn't matter the number. For us, Balinese people, you are our truly representation. And,
Any more questions? Sorry, I'm just jumping in.
Pardon?
She wonders if the governor feels uncomfortable that you might be stepping into his seat. But I don't think that's
And
your
so,
style.
we keep on doing what we do. We keep on voicing what we have to how do you call it, we keep on fighting for everything that we need to fight for one reason, for the people. Because if I would like to have all the comfort in life, we have Nilu Jelantik, and our business doesn't rely on tourism. Because we can fly as far as 40,000 kilometers with my 2-liter suitcase and meet our loyal customers. You know what I mean? But this is not the point of living. So, yeah. Yes, Papa.
So to put you on the spot at the end, what is the solution?
Well, for every solution that we gave, the guy actually listened to us, because he listened to the solution and he changed the rules. But then, not everybody will have those gentleman attitude to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for canceling 100,000 flight ticket. I'm sorry for canceling 50,000 rooms. Not everybody will have the big, the big heart to do that. And for me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The most important, the rules has been changed. The law has been changed. And this is why we keep on, we keep on in the way, we keep on criticizing with the solution. But why we are doing that? Because, like my general manager always tells me, Nilu, you are not a governor, you are not a bupati, you are not a legislative, you don't have any position in any government, but why everybody call us? Why hundreds of people calling us every day? Your health care is not accepted, you being bullied by for example, your son had an accident, and then the hospital reject them, and the baby, and all of that. And we are talking about nationwide, not only Bali. And if I complain on social media, maybe only 10% that I do, but the other 90% I make a phone call. When I know the leader or the public officer or the let's say governor or minister, when they listen, I don't post it. I just pick up my phone and I just told them. Like for example, when I say to the minister, I told them, what has to be in Jakarta? Not everybody like to see the wall and the window on those tiny air conditioning rooms. Some people, they would like to come to Bali, enjoying the scenery. Maybe they would like to put their feet on the sand. For 20 months they didn't come. Just make it 50-50. Put that 50% in Jakarta, and the other 50% you bring it to Bali. And you fight for it, because you are the minister. You see what happened today? So we didn't say that everything that we say become reality. But at the end of the day, we only the messenger. We are facing with the fact that 93% rooms are empty. We are facing with the fact that hundreds of thousands of people in Bali are losing their jobs. We are facing with the fact that I have to sell hundreds of items every day online on my social media that are not belong to me. That people think, oh, Nilu Jelantik, she's selling everything. She become the businesswoman of everything, selling pillows, selling chicken, selling fish, selling sambal, selling everything, selling bandana, selling kebaya, selling, you know what I mean? But we have to do that for free.
To help people.
I usually make about $2,000 an hour by opening my mouth. They pay me $2,000 for 1 hour by saying, you know, saying whatever they want me to say. For example, oh, Nilu Jelantik, can you please talking about digital marketing? So I open my mouth, I talk about digital marketing. They pay me 25 million rupiah an hour. But you are on the field. You go to the island with only 4 tourists. You see all those empty restaurants. What can you do? You help them, doing everything that they can, and then at the same time, of course, you have to complain. You can only pass a complaint with the solution. If you don't listen, I will keep on complaining until you change the law, and most of the, how do you call it, lots of the hotel institution in Bali with a big organization, they call me. I don't own a hotel, I don't have restaurants, I don't own coffee shop. But on the last minute, they will call me, please say something. But I told them, you sleep with him. You spend your hours and days with him. Maybe your office is next to him. Because my position is only, how do you call it? I know that at the end of the day, I became martyr. You cannot be loved by doing, of course, with people knows Nilu Jelantik, but you know, most of the Bali people, they don't like to be told what to do, and but we keep on doing that, and we see some, how do you call it, some light
At the end of the tunnel.
you know, yeah, and but we really hope that there will be no mistake to be done. I mean, we already have 20 months to really reshaping the way Bali will treat themselves, or how Bali would like to represent themselves. Like, for example, Bali is a woman, a beautiful woman that's grown up. Maybe she's now in her 50s, maybe. But for the last 20 years, she's been abused, you know. Everybody wants to take advantage of her. And today, she's getting old, she's growing old, you know. Me, as in Nilu Jelantik, we have a 19 years old woman as my team, and 73 years old woman as part also as our team. You understand what I mean? And at the same time, we see Bali as, how do you call it, like, I mean, the place that we will die here. And we cannot just do the things that we want to do, the things that we want to say, and knowing that in 3 years we no longer take the job. No, 3 years later we no longer, you know, have so I use all the energy that I can with one intention, only one intention, for the people. For the people, be it for the housekeeping, be it for the hotel owners, the restaurant owners, everybody is equal in this island. You don't call them names. You don't call them suddenly you are a snake, or you are sucking our land, or you only buy the land, or only you build a hotel and you bring nothing to Bali. Hello, you know. I mean, when you are investor, you run a business, you invest a lot, you can win a lot, you can lose a lot, you know. When you work as an employee, you dedicate so much of your time and energy, then you get the remuneration as your contribution. So there's always demand and supply. So one day if you want to become entrepreneur, Talk to your boss. I want to build my own hotels. I want to build my own restaurants. I'll stop working for you. So this is like a human evolution. But you cannot suddenly say like, okay, let's break up. Thank you for the last 40 years of our time. Thank you for the beauty of the tourism, the beauty of Ubud, the beauty of Karangasem, or the beauty of Badung. And now let's go back to farming.
Yes.
For me,
any more questions?
I'm not against that, but it has to be gradually.
Yeah.
You cannot just kill this one and start raising another one. You know, not everybody is ready with B plan, C plan, D plan, E plan. This is what we've been teaching for the last 20 months to the Bali people. You need to have an extra exit plan, you know, and it works. It works, and next week we move on to Java. They have more industry than us, so their survival rate is higher.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, but just before we wrap up, any more questions? Lots. I think that's the thing. I think there's so many questions. Sorry. What time is it now? Okay. I'd love to hear about your Java story, but we might have to revisit that.
So first of all, I mean, before I finish this session, I would like to thank you. I didn't know that if you are the long-term resident in Bali,
Yes.
if you are visiting in Bali, or you already made Bali your home. Thank you very much.
Oh, and Lombok, sorry.
Lombok, Brembe kabar. Thank you very much for your love. This is your home as much as it is my home, and we'll be okay. We'll be okay, and Bali will be okay. It will take time, but I can assure you, in the next 5 to 10 years of time from now, we will have another option other than tourism. I mean, tourism will be always the darling of Bali, but then our younger generation will be able to learn the balance. So tourism will no be longer only as a destination, how do you call it, destination, but people like Ibu Janet that I really admire. Ever since she created the Ubud Writer Festival and also the food festival, and she already introduced a different kind of tourism, you know, because you don't only go to Bali to enjoy Danau Batur, for example, but you can also come to Bali to enjoy Danau Batur. At the same time, you can learn how to cook mujair nyat-nyat.
The fish.
You know what I mean? And this is what we call experience destination, and then it can be anything. And then the only thing that we need now is the certainty in rules, certainty in how do you call it? Not like the stability in. They have to be able to, you know, to speak in one word, because it will affect the lots of lives, and not only tourists but also the Balinese people. Yeah, thank you.
Well, huge round of applause, Nilo Jelantik. Please follow her on Instagram. And the good thing about all the comments on Instagram, you have the little translation thing at the bottom here. So if you're thinking, what's she talking about now? She's attacking Costa again, you know. And so you can read all about it. And then if you have any questions, she'll always answer you. So you can say, by the way, blah 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 blah. So you know, one of Bali's great change makers, and if she says it has to change, it does. So terima kasih banyak. And yeah, thank you for your story. Obviously, we could sit here for hours, but yeah, we have to end now. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a beautiful day to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. We have to get some.